Thanks, Adriana. And thank you all for coming. Excuse my English. Thank you for tolerating it. The first book that I published, Price and Beauty, which Adriana mentioned, is really about how people assign value to bodies. And I looked at the case of the fashion modeling markets. And today, what I'd like to share with you is a new project that I've been working on, which traces how people also assign value to bodies, but not in a world of work so much as a world of leisure. And in particular, a world of VIP leisure, the VIP standing for very important people, which is a kind of placeholder for people who are treated as high-income, high-spending consumers. And what I did for this project was follow a niche of what we would call the global 1%, and follow them as they hang out in high-priced bottle service nightclubs. Bottle service nightclubs look something like this. I'll center my talk around mostly a description of the scene, because my sense is that it's not really too common or too familiar in the Serbian context. So this is a photo that I took of a nightclub in New York. Bottle service nightclubs are places in which people come into a club and instead of ordering drinks at the bar, they rent the table for the night, and bottles of alcohol are brought to their tables, carried by women who are called bottle girls, and they tend to wear these kinds of dresses, and they carry the bottles of alcohol and they're fixed with sparklers, lit fireworks, so it attracts the attention of everybody in the club so everybody can see. So it's predicated on a display. And the table rents to sit at one of these tables in one of these VIP bottle service clubs are anywhere from $500 to $5,000 starting. And these are pictures that I took of bar tabs and of menus in New York. So you can see $30,000 for one tab, including, you can't see this at the top, $147 for bottles of water. And here, a Methuselah, which is a 6-liter bottle of champagne, Methuselah of Cristal is going for $40,000 in New York. So the prices are pretty astronomical, and the spending is quite visible with the sparklers. So previously, nightclubbing in cities like New York throughout the 1990s would involve everybody paying an entry ticket at the door. You would pay a cost to come inside the club, and then maybe there would be a VIP section roped off in the corner for high spenders. What the bottle service nightclub does is they restrict entry to everybody coming inside who has some kind of recognizable capital, as we'll see, economic, beauty or bodily capital, cultural capital, and so on. So for my purposes, it becomes a really interesting site because it transforms the entire space into a space for people that are recognized as VIP, right? People that are recognized as very important people. So it becomes a case to study the role of consumption, the role of display, and the role of women in elite class formation and elite identity. It's a really important time right now to be studying elites, and it's gaining more traction in sociology, which is traditionally focused with the study of people that are on the lower ends of the class hierarchy. But we know now today that the top 1% in the United States are controlling the greatest share of the country's wealth and income since the 1920s. Elites today are different than elites of generations past. For one thing, they have more money. The sheer volume that the 1% commands today is much larger than generations past. Their fortunes are coming not only from inheritance, but also from earnings in fields like finance. And the elites today are more globally dispersed, and they're international. So, while I followed this, the VIP nightlife scene, I documented the way in which it actually is international. And this VIP bottle service culture constitutes a global circuit of this kind of consumption. So these are images that I took across this circuit. Yeah, from New York, the Hamptons, Saint-Tropez, Milan, and Miami. And throughout each place, the chances are excellent I would hear the same music, see the same fashions, consume the same brands of alcohol, see the same people even, the party organizers, the women in attendance, and the men that are spending, and you can see the same kind of rituals with the fireworks coming out. This constitutes a global calendar of jet-set spending. So at certain times of the year, at certain places around the globe, so New York in September, the Hamptons in the summertime, Saint-Tropez in June, all of these people will congregate and replay these kinds of rituals. So it's what we could think of as a kind of re-territorialization of the elite. Okay, so among the global 1%, if you just look at the breakdown of who are the major owners of capital, mostly these are men. However, by following this scene, I came to realize that women are pretty important and they figure quite prominently in these spaces. So in documenting how elite social spaces are gendered, I came to see women's bodily capital as being put to particular kinds of use and being important for men's class projects. Okay, so to start a discussion on how bodies work as class distinction, the sociology literature has quite a bit to draw from, following out of the work of Pierre Bourdieu and the idea of embodied cultural capital, right? The idea that we wear our class in our bodies and this becomes a means of distinction. So in the wake of Bourdieu's concept of cultural capital, what we see is a ton of scholars trying to figure out exactly what is the role of the body in showing class distinction or reproducing class. Lots of concepts start to proliferate, from bodily capital, Louis Foucault's study of the sports market, sexual capital, erotic capital, other people say aesthetic capital, subcultural capital, and so on. I saw somebody make a joke one time that sociology is having an accumulation of capitals in its own right now. But across these different perspectives, the idea that we get is that capital, embodied cultural capital, is something that an individual has, and they go into a field and they can convert this for resources for this individual. But then if you look at the literature on gender and bodies and distinction, you'll see a lot of scholars are grappling with this question of how the phenomenon is particularly gendered, such that in luxury retail settings, in sex work like hostess clubs, even in fraternities or nightlife organizations, women function as a kind of status signal that enables men to show off, in a sense, or they function as what Beverly Skeggs calls a kind of sign-bearing capital. So when you put these two perspectives together, what you see is a little bit of a tension in the literature on embodied cultural capital. On the one hand, with all of these different concepts of embodied cultural capital, you can't really see this, sorry, but it says the body is a kind of individual capital, right? It's something that an individual has, an individual can convert for personal gain within a specific field. Whereas on the other hand, we see that the body, in particular women's bodies, are a kind of capital for somebody else, whether it's an organization, like a luxury retail organization, or whether it's something like fraternities. Okay. What we see with this question of the body as being used for someone else is that it often happens with a wage, right? Oftentimes women are paid to perform these kinds of roles in, say, luxury retail or in sex work, certainly, but not necessarily. In the case of fraternities is an instance in which women go to frat parties and their presence helps the fraternity house gain visibility. Fraternities, I gather, are not such a big thing here, but they're huge on American college campuses. It's like men's college parties. Okay, so a question that emerges then from the women in the VIP is, why is it that people consent to having their bodily capital appropriated? How does the system work? So my question is one about ownership. How is ownership of somebody else's capital established? How is value extracted? If bodily capital generates value, where does that value go? And who gets to harness it, and how does this happen? So what my argument for you today will be is I'll show you step by step what I claim is a relational process through which enterprising men are able to harness value from women's bodily capital. And I'll also show you why it is that women consent to this system, consent and enjoy this system. Okay, so for the methods, these are kinds of process questions. They would require ethnography. Sociologists have a real trouble doing ethnography of elites. We have a problem that we call studying up. Most ethnography is of people who are in lower, more vulnerable social positions. It's hard to crack into elite circles. The way that I did it was I utilized my ties from the fashion model market, because what I discovered is that the promoters of the nightclubs very much are concerned to have models at their table. So models become a certain kind of population that they target to bring into the clubs. So what I did was I drew on my previous ties in fashion in order to meet the nightclub organizers, who are called party promoters. And in exchange for me going out with them to kind of fill a seat at their tables, they let me interview them and they let me shadow them. I draw on a method that Margaret Krusenbach calls the go-along method. It's basically what most ethnographers do, a kind of hybrid of interviewing and ethnography at the same time. You kind of follow your participants throughout the social world on their daily routines, or in this case, nightly routines. So I went out a lot for the project, about 120 nights, a little bit more. In New York, I followed the organizers in the circuit to the Hamptons. I followed them to Miami and to Cannes. I did this for about a year and a half, while I also did interviews with 44 of the promoters, 2 club owners, 20 women, and 20 clients. The clients are the people who are buying the bottles. That was the only requirement for you to be considered a client in my study. And the women are women that I recruited from the tables. A quick note about the promoters, because they're really the kind of the central broker between the women and the clients here. These are promoters with what they would call their girls. A snapshot of these guys. Okay, you can't really see them, but they're very charming and they're good looking. These 2 are dressed in tattoos and kind of stylish, flashy clothing. You can normally recognize promoters at a nightclub because they tend to be surrounded by lots of young, uniformly thin and attractive women. And this is a picture that they put on their own Facebook profile. So their Facebooks are kind of full of these pictures as well. They're majority men. I had a really hard time locating women in this position, especially women that would be willing to do an interview. They tend to be about 30 years old. They are overrepresented for racial diversity, largely black, a few Asians, and a lot of Latinos. And half of them are immigrant, so they're overrepresented in immigrant status. They can speak multiple languages. They tend to come from lower class backgrounds. It's a bit of a mix with their educational and class backgrounds, but for the most part, they have some college. Most of them have finished high school, and most of them come from lower middle class backgrounds. And they can earn about $200 to $1,500 a night. And for this money, what they do each night at a nightclub is they host a table with women at their table, and their job is to make sure that there are always women at the table. And remember, women do not get paid for this role that they perform. And the promoters finally can receive a commission on bottle sales if they bring a client in through word of mouth, or they recommend one of their wealthy friends to a nightclub. They can get 10 to 20% off of the bottle sales from the club. Okay, to move forward with this question of how it is that women's bodily capital gets appropriated and what's this relational mechanisms of ownership, what I'll do first is lay out for you what this stage of the nightclub looks like, who are the key players within it, and then we'll look at this brokerage process that the promoters do to bring the women into the club. So this is an actual nightclub that I spent some time in, or the kind of rendering of what a club would look like when you come inside. And clubs follow a kind of hierarchy to them. So within the city, the A-list VIP clubs are defined by those that have the most desirable clients and the most desirable women inside. So first, the desirable clients. At the top, the most desirable clients are referred to as whales. You might be familiar with this term whales from finance or casino lingo. These are people who spend a lot of money, they make a big splash. So these are men who come into the club and they're spending upwards of $10,000 a night. So they have high stores of economic capital. Below whales, you have celebrities that have symbolic capital. Sometimes they pay for their beverages. Sometimes they also spend lots of money, but they bring an image to the club. Next, you have affluent New Yorkers and affluent tourists. These are people who are spending about $1,000 to $2,000 a night. They're the so-called bread and butter of the nightclub industry. They don't make huge splashes, but they're there pretty consistently. Next, you have people that are called fillers. And fillers here they don't have enough economic resources to buy their own table or to rent their own table for the night, so they have to drink their drinks at the bar. They have to stand. But fillers do have recognizable stores of cultural capital, so they look cool, they look good, and the club wants them inside so that the club doesn't look empty. And next you have a category of people who are generally derided for their lack of both economic and cultural capital. These are people like referred to as bridge and tunnel. So bridge and tunnel is, it references people who don't live in, or are perceived to not be able to live in Manhattan, so they have to travel into the city by bridge or by tunnel in order to come to the club. So anyone from the Jersey Shore, the crowd is dangerous, there's trouble, there's fights. So there's kind of general sense that these people don't belong and they're denied entry. Sometimes they're also called losers. And this is the way that they would sit as well. So the owner will always be there, and he'll have his table, and owners are almost always men. And the promoters, if you have a room full of about 20 tables around, the promoters will be positioned strategically, again, to host a group of women between 8 and 12 or so. And then you'll have a couple of clients who will be buying bottles. Okay. The women. Valuable women in this space, the kinds of women that the club organizers want, are women that have recognizably high stores of bodily capital, assessed in the proximity to looking like a fashion model. I asked one promoter, what's with this deal with models? Why are promoters always chasing after models? And he explained it's quality, and quality is a word that I heard constantly in reference to women. So it's beautiful to watch and see. A model is a model. She goes into a club, she's like a flashlight, and the guy next to her will say, damn, the club is hot, get me another bottle. So the formula is, not very cleverly, I suppose, sometimes referred to as models for bottles. The two seem to go together. These kinds of women are essentially whale bait. After models, you have a group of women who are not quite models, but close enough. They might be a little bit older, which would be my category, I think. They might be a little bit larger in size. But there are women who can essentially pass as fashion models, so they have they're close enough. Below that, you have women who are just average women that are referred to as civilians or worse. Women are talked about in pretty clear derogatory terms for failure to look like fashion models. They're routinely called things like midgets or hobbits or muppets. And you know, Muppets is also a finance term. There was a book by Greg Smith on Goldman Sachs, in which this guy who was a high-up broker at Goldman Sachs let it slip that they used to refer to their own clients as Muppets, which is someone who kind of doesn't know what's going on and isn't in on how the system works. Okay, so if you put all of this together, what you can see is a kind of hierarchies of worth of people who are valued to come inside the space, and it's very clearly gendered. So the clients are almost always men, and then women, while clients have economic, social, cultural capital as well, women are pretty much solely valued based on their looks, based on their bodily capital, their proximity to looking like fashion models, and they don't pay. Women in these spaces are treated free of charge. The promoter has the table and the club pays for their drinks on the house, so comped, right, complimentary. So the women don't pay anything, they're comped, or they're denied entry entirely. Okay, so if we were to stop here and do this kind of Bourdieusian field analysis, I could tell you a story in which I said, look, women have bodily capital, it's field specific, and look at what they get for it. It's convertible for things like access, free drinks, they get to go to Saint-Tropez, oftentimes they get invited free of charge to go to these destination parties. So we could do this kind of analysis in which we show how bodily capital is convertible for personal gain by women. But if we wanted to move beyond this perspective of capital as a personal advantage, a perspective that largely characterizes much of the studies of embodied cultural capital led by Bourdieu, then we might ask instead, who, beyond any particular individual, benefits from women's bodies? Where does the value that they generate ultimately go? And this question came to me as I was doing interviews with the promoters, where it became very clear that the promoter's career and the promoter's climbing through the VIP is intricately tied to the perceived quality of the women around him. So for instance, an interview with one promoter, I'll set it up for you. So we were at a club, and we were at his table, and it was me and one other woman, and he's looking across the room at another promoter's table that's full of women, and he's looking at those women, and what he says to me is, you know, for us, what we want is quality over quantity. He's looking at this other table. So we have 2 great girls, and that's better than that other guy. He'll just bring anything, girls that look like retarded prostitutes with big boobs and plastic in their lips, cheesy style. That's worse than just one good girl. So you see this kind of a balance that the promoters are making between quantity and quality. But what it signals for us also is that men in this VIP arena can get value from women's capital. And that indeed, they're able to harness value from women's capital. And I'll argue that the value that the men get is greater than what the women can get themselves. So bodily capital is less a property of women and more women as property. This is why I refer to it as girl capital, or girls as capital, which I define as just a symbolic resource that men are able to appropriate and to use. Actually, this is another Facebook picture from these promoters, and you can't quite see the clients at the top. I blacked their eyes out. But the gender ratio is very much in favor of the men. It's like 70% women. Okay, so what I'll argue now for you is that there's a relational process through which women's bodily capital gets converted into girl capital, in which male promoters are able to harness value off of women's bodily capital. It happens in these 4 stages I outline: recruitment, mobilization, control, and discipline. Okay, on recruitment, promoters spend an enormous amount of time trying to replenish and refresh the amount of girls that they have, the quantity of quality girls that they have. And notice the slippage in my language. I now refer to women as girls, because in the scene they are referred to as girls. So the recruitment process looks like this, as promoters go through this accumulation of girl capital. They recruit girls through Facebook, through word of mouth. When that fails, they drive big SUVs in the city, specifically so that they can fit more female bodies into the car. They park the SUV on busy corners in, say, Soho or in Union Square, Broadway and Prince, because they know that these are places in the city that are full of models. They know that this is where the model casting agencies are, and when the design studios are. They park their cars, and when a girl walks by, they jump out of the car, leaving it running, chase her down, and try to invite her to a party. So they target models. There's a kind of girl hunt that they do throughout the city. They accumulate girl capital in ways that legally would look like harassment. So they find out where the model apartments are, owned by modeling agencies. They sneak inside the building and knock on doors to invite girls to come out. They find out the phone numbers of the model apartments and call daily, every day at 5 p.m. To invite new girls that have come to the city. So things that look like stalking, basically. And their goal is to get the phone number of the girl. And once they have the phone number of the girl, then they start doing the second stage in the process, which is mobilization. So girl capital is only valuable for a promoter if the promoter is able to mobilize it. So towards those ends, he needs her to show up at the parties. Key for this is that the girls have a good time. Central to the girls' good time is this enormous circulation of free stuff or comped goods. So the club pays the promoter to be there at his table from, say, 12 to 3 in the morning. The night will begin, however, with a dinner at around 10 or 11 o'clock, which will be paid for by the restaurant or comped by the restaurant, because the restaurant also benefits by having a bunch of models in its establishment. So dinner invitations look like this. By the way, doing fieldwork with a smartphone is really much easier than when I was doing fieldwork for my first project with pen and paper. So I just kind of saved all of my text invitations. You can go through and code them and see what commonalities come out. Okay, so this promoter writes me, I'm going to dinner, then a drink with a multi-billionaire friend. You should come and order whatever you like. Right, this is no small change for women who are wannabe models or women who are new to the city and hoping to become models. They tend not to have that much money. At the dinners, the women there will photograph their food and post it on their Instagram or their Facebook. So this is a picture of all the sushi at one dinner, and the girl writes, "all free," with exclamation points. Okay, so we know that there's no such thing as a free gift from Marcel Mauss. All of this circulation of free stuff enrolls people into more systems of reciprocity and expectations of future obligation. And indeed, the dinner is meant as an enticement to get the girls to come out. Okay, in addition to the stuff, the kind of free stuff and the compte goods, promoters also perform what economic sociologist Viviane Zalazar refers to as a kind of relational work, the work of maintaining, upkeeping, and producing social ties that are intertwined with economic ties. So towards these ends, promoters spend a lot of time trying to build friendships with girls through favors, through shared time, through shared experiences. So for instance, lots of text messages that offer things like friendships and favors and perks. So, hey, do you want to come to a dinner? Hey, do you want to go golfing? Do you want to take an exercise class? Offers to hang out, to be friends. All of this, in a sense, frames these exchanges not as economic and not as labor, but as friendship, right? And as leisure and as fun. Relational work can also take the form of the romantic. The invitations are laden with all kinds of flirtatious openings. So for instance, a promoter's invitation, I only want to have sex on days that begin with a T, Tuesday, Thanksgiving, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, tonight, for instance. So there's a kind of innuendo that gets charged in the invitations. The night after going out with a promoter, I get a text. This one's very funny. I was interviewing a woman that I had met at the table the night before, and during the interview at a coffee shop, our phones buzzed at more or less the same time, and we both had the same message, which was, "I had an amazing time last night, you looked beautiful, and I hope you had as much fun as everyone else." So promoters are kind of constantly doing this ego stroking and flirtation. It's not all in discourse. There's actual sex that takes place between the promoters and the girls. Promoters date models. They target models strategically, not just any models. They'll target specific models that are more likely to encourage their girlfriends to come out. They target girls that have lots of girlfriends, girls that live in models' apartments. So for instance, a promoter says, "I was throwing parties at one point. I had the most models at my parties. How do you get the most models?" He says, "I'll tell you, you find the popular girl, the most exciting girl in the model apartment, and you fuck her." Pardon my French. You find the popular one, and it's that simple. Okay, so I call these various layers of flirtation and intimacies strategic intimacies, right? They're a way of combining the economic and the relational in ways that obfuscate or hide what is at the core of an economic exchange system. And so these promoters are doing considerable effort to find and recruit girls as capital, to mobilize the girls to come out. The third stage in this process of brokerage is control. So to get the girls to come to the club, this is quite an accomplishment for a promoter, but in addition, the promoters need the girls to stay, and they need the girls to stay at the table. But they need to do this in a way that controls labor without it looking like labor control. So promoters will try to keep the girls at the table. They control their time, they control their movement. They'll do simple things like bribing the security personnel so that the girls can smoke, because there's no smoking in nightclubs in New York, but the promoters will bribe security so they can smoke at the table as opposed to wander off and go outside and maybe not come back. The promoters police their clothing so that they look like girls. They're encouraged to wear high heels. Some promoters keep a spare dress and a pair of high heels in their big SUVs. They keep outsiders away. So if girls want to bring their friends to the table, the promoter will check her Facebook images before allowing outsiders to come in. And girls' boyfriends are definitely not welcome at the table. Okay, related to control is discipline. So when these controlling techniques don't work entirely, when the girls are not keeping up their end of an implicit bargain, remember it's implicit, it can't be made explicit, promoters resort to yelling at girls, scolding them, telling them to leave. To give you an instance, one day coming back from the Hamptons with a couple of promoters, they work as a team, these guys. Jay explains how some girl the night before, we're all staying in a house together in the Hamptons, this girl was a pain in the ass. I had to go look for her three times. So if the girl wanders from the table, sometimes they'll send somebody, one of the promoters will have to go chase her and bring her back to the table. So I had to look for her 3 times. She brought some random dude to the table. And so I told her at the bottom, no more bringing random dudes to the table. And she says, well, okay, then no more bringing girls to the table. And this guy, Jay, is kind of flabbergasted. He's like, no, we're bringing girls to the table. It's our table. We're like, they control the table. We bring who we want. And so they kind of carry on the conversation, and Morton says, I'm thinking I'm just not going to drive her back home. Like, just leave her in the Hamptons, this girl, and get her to figure out her own way back. And then they have a discussion about, like, well, no matter how difficult a girl is, I wouldn't leave her out here. Maybe I would give her money to take the train and so on. So as a last resort, girls will be yelled at, disciplined, and indeed left behind, which I witnessed a few times. Discipline is quite problematic, right? Because it threatens to undermine all of the intimacy that has been established through that intense relational work. It threatens to reveal the labor behind the leisure, the economic relation behind the friendship. Promoters can't treat girls too much like property and not like friends, which was summed up nicely by a client that I interviewed who says that, I always say when you're a promoter, it's like herding kittens. You have to do 2 things, make them purr and hit them with a spray bottle. Okay, so at this point, you're probably wondering, and I think it's very, very fair to wonder, why are the girls here? What's the mission for the girls? What are their motivations? What are their strategies? In interviews with the girls, I found that they emphasize 4 different things. One is indeed the free stuff. They like getting in on these comped dinners. They like access to a club. Many of them are under the age of legal drinking age in the US, which is 21. So they get access with promoters. They emphasize also the pleasures of being out in these kind of very expensive nightlife scenes. It's really hard to explain the pleasures in an academic setting, but to kind of summarize for it, the girls come into a scene that is incredibly seductive. There are gorgeous lighting systems, incredibly plush furniture design, incredibly powerful sound systems. It's pumping out their favorite beats of hip hop and house music, songs that they know and love. The fun is aided and abetted by bottomless glasses of champagne, sometimes drugs like MDMA and cocaine as well. Everybody is taking pictures of each other and of themselves. The selfie is ubiquitous. They post it onto Facebook, and this inspires yet another potlatch of all of their friends back home giving them the thumbs up. So it is quite pleasurable to be a part of this scene and this party vibe, especially if you're, say, 20, 22. 33, not so much. Okay, they emphasize also the friendship networks that many of them are newcomers to the city. They don't have friends. They're far away from home. They meet these promoters on the street that essentially open up doors for them to meet other girls that are in the same position like themselves, to meet these flirty promoters whom they find attractive, and to meet all kinds of other people in the club. So they get a network. And then many of them also emphasize the friendship and the support for the promoter. They actually do believe in the friendship, and they do want to support the promoter. So they talk about their promoters as their friends. Everybody talks about everybody as friends in this scene. The promoters talk about clients as friends. The girls talk about promoters and friends as friends, and so on. But within this world of economic sliced with friend relations, there's a recognition of use. There's a recognition that everybody is also capturing a kind of use value from each other. So for instance, a promoter explains to me that everybody is using everyone, but there's a difference between being used and getting taken advantage of. So in his worldview, the club is using the promoter is using his friends, and your friends want to party, so they're using the promoter as well. Notice this, the promoter thinks he's being used, right? Even from the promoter's point of view, he's being used by the girls. So, but when a girl brings out her guy friend, that's taking advantage. So there are boundaries, right? There's a kind of moral economy to the flow of girls as capital. There's a kind of sense of what's appropriate and what's inappropriate. Okay, one clear thing that's very much not appropriate, that I'll just add as a kind of quick side note, is getting paid for this work. So the girls at the tables almost never get paid. When promoters offer them cash, like, would you like $40 to come out with me tonight? They usually turn it down. They don't want to be paid for going out, which should be fun. But if you kind of took a broader definition of what sex work is, as Ron Weitzer does, and we think of it as any commercial sexual exchange, this flow of girls as capital would look like a sex work, right? It's near prostitution, if you expand sex into affect and beauty and body. And indeed, everybody recognizes that it's very close to prostitution, and people work discursively in interviews and in practice to differentiate their role in this scene as distinct from escorting or prostitution, which also happens in the club. So there's prostitutes that circulate through these clubs as well. So the way that they manage it is through this boundary work. So promoters, first and foremost, always say that they're not pimps, even without prompting in interviews. A promoter will define himself vis-a-vis pimps and says that he doesn't pimp his girls. The girls, again, they refuse to take money for the most part, again, because they want to be there for pleasure and for fun, not for labor. And people differentiate the girls in the club from other women that are paid to be in the club, including the bottle girls, those girls that are carrying the bottles. That's often described as a dirty kind of job. And table girls are girls who are paid by the club to sit at clients' tables. So they stand at the bar, and then when a client wants a girl to sit at his table, they send the table girls, they get $100 a night. So it's a little bit off. So this promoter says a lot of girls do that table girl work. They do it undercover because they don't want to get a bad reputation. Because if you're sitting at a client's table and people see you doing it all the time, you might be a prostitute. Whereas if you're with me at my table with all the girls, you're a model, right? So it's essentially the same kind of thing that happens, but it's framed very differently. And one is getting paid in cash, the other is getting paid in ego stroking and in free dinners. But then he goes on to say, I don't like the table girls, they can be slutty. Right, so, okay. And finally, most of the girls say that they are not motivated there to meet men. So in that slide of their motivations, I was kind of surprised that in interviews, nobody explained that they came to the clubs hoping to meet a man or hoping to meet a wealthy man. However, they would draw distinctions between themselves and girls that they think are strategically out to meet a man. And those girls are referred to as bitches, which is a kind of a popular Eastern European term for a woman for hire. And they're often seen as being Russian as well. So people would kind of conflate a girl who's looking for a rich man with being an escort or with being a Russian woman. And so the idea of a Russian woman across the interviews with promoters, with the clients, and also with the girls, Russians kind of, they serve a sort of a symbolic anchor or kind of a specter of a woman who's too strategic in looking for a man. And these are women that the girls define themselves in opposition to. Okay. So to kind of wrap up, we can come to the so what question. Why do we care about the circulation of girls in the VIP? Why does this matter? So I argue that it matters for elite class formation and class identity on three different levels. The circulation of girls in the VIP circuit does work for men who are in the elite or who are looking to join the elite. So first and foremost, girl capital is convertible for economic capital. Most of the club owners, at least in New York, they came up through being promoters themselves. Of the 17 different clubs that I spent time in New York, there was only one that was owned and operated by a woman. So the nightlife industry is almost entirely run by men and for men, but on girls. And these clubs turn huge amounts of profits and they can grow into transnational enterprises. This is not to say that girls don't get some kinds of rewards. Certainly, the girls get champagne, they get trips to Saint-Tropez, they get free dinners that they can post on their Facebook pages. However, compared to the vast and fungible economic sums of money that their presence enables, I argue that girls' free stuff is relatively short-lived and of trivial value. On the second level, girl capital is convertible to men as symbolic capital. So being around girl capital lends status to men. This is a strategy by which men who are enterprising and who want to join the elite can try to do so by entering VIP circles. If they're surrounded by girls, they get in. They get in and they get noticed. It's a strategy of promoters as well to try to attract attention from potential business investors. The girls, however, in interviews, they lack a similar scale of a clear narrative trajectory. So when the girls talk about why they're there in the club, they're much less likely to talk about meeting important people that can help be investors for their business plans than are the promoters, certainly. So the promoters are thinking long terms of accumulating social ties, the girls less so. And as a side note, the kind of status signaling that girl capital affords the male promoters was noticeably absent in the interviews I did with female promoters. So I didn't talk much about the female promoters. There were only 5 that I found and could interview in New York, and I think that there's really only 7 in New York in total. So I missed 2 of them. But in these interviews with the 5 women promoters, they were far more likely to discuss difficulties in controlling the girls, keeping the girls at the table, getting the girls to come out in the absence of sexualized innuendo or flirtation. The difficulty in keeping outsiders away from their table, difficulty in keeping other male promoters from coming to their table and taking their girls away from them, and difficulty in being taken seriously and being paid by club owners. And they were far more concerned with their image. So a lot of the male promoters that I interviewed, they thought it was really cool that I was writing a book about them, and they were happy to open up and share. The women promoters were very scared. They didn't want anything to be associated with them and nightlife promotions. One of them wears wigs when she goes out to clubs. They're afraid of too close associations with sex work. Okay, and then on the third level, girl capital consolidates class relations, or it facilitates an arena for elite men to meet one another. The presence of women helps men enjoy each other's company, break the ice, and kind of ease interactions in a general sense. So all of this constitutes what I claim is a traffic in women in the old anthropological sense of the word, or in Gail Rubin's sense of women as social commerce, but the circulation of women creates value that women are not in a position to capture the benefits of themselves. So women, in a sense, are part of what gets consumed here. This is similar to research that exists already on the sex industry, right? Like hostess clubs throughout Asia provide a forum for Asian men, Asian businessmen to meet and wheel and deal and do business with one another, and the girls are kind of enabling it through their presence. But what's interesting in this case is that the women do it without a wage, similar to research that has been found on US college fraternities. In a sense, what we could argue is bodily capital in women's hands is less valuable than bodily capital of women in men's hands. Okay, so to come to a kind of larger theoretical contribution, by mapping out this process, recruitment, mobilization, control, and discipline, what we see is the process that hinges together on what we would call relational work that kind of combines in this way friendship with employment, leisure with labor, and transforms what looks like sex work into sexy fun, yes? And a kind of larger contribution to come back to Bourdieu and this idea of capital. So much of the literature since Bourdieu has looked at how capital operates as at an individual level. I mean, ironically, because it's a field level analysis, but capital is often seen as a kind of individual property that a person can convert for personal asset or for personal advantages. But if you look at a kind of larger structure, you can see that embodied cultural capital, in fact, creates value that, because in this case, because of the way in which gender structures the field, it has unequal value, or it's unequally realized by the holders of the capital and gets appropriated by men into collectively unequal advantages. Okay, thank you.